They say a marriage begins with truth, but mine began with silence. And silence, I've learned, can hide more than any lie ever could. I remember the exact moment I realized something was wrong. It wasn't the kind of revelation that hits like thunder. It was quieter than that, a hesitation, a pause that lasted half a breath too long. David was standing by the sink, rinsing a coffee mug, when his phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced at it without thinking, the way wives do when they've seen the same routine 1,000 times. But this time, his reaction was different. He froze, just for a second. Then he turned the screen face down. "Spam," he said quickly, the word sharp and forced. That's all it took, one word, one syllable that didn't sit right in my chest. Because David never ignored his phone. He was the kind of man who lived by it. Morning updates from his business, messages from clients, even jokes from his old college buddies. But that day, he turned it face down and walked away like it had burned him. It was the smallest thing, and yet it felt like the first crack in glass. That morning had started like any other. The smell of toasted bread, the hum of the old refrigerator, sunlight creeping in through the blinds, striping our kitchen in gold. We'd been married 6 years by then. Our house wasn't big, but it was comfortable. 2 bedrooms, creaky wooden floors, a garden David promised he'd finish one of these days. He used to tease me about my habit of talking to the plants. "You're too sentimental," he'd laugh. "They don't care if you had a rough day." But I'd just smile and say, "Maybe they do." That was us. Small, ordinary moments that made up what I thought was an extraordinary love. I believed in us completely. After breakfast, I watched him leave for work, his tie slightly crooked, his cologne trailing behind him. I loved that scent. Cedar and something faintly sweet. The kind of smell that lingers long after the door closes. It used to comfort me. That day, it didn't. As I stood there in the doorway, I caught sight of his mug, still half full, coffee growing cold. He never left it unfinished. It was silly, I told myself. People forget things. Maybe he was late. Maybe the phone call had distracted him. But even as I cleaned the counter, something in me whispered, "Watch closely now." I tried to push it away. Suspicion has a way of creeping in quietly, like a shadow at your feet. It doesn't announce itself. It just lingers until it becomes part of the room. To quiet my mind, I threw myself into my day. I worked from home, managing small freelance projects. I'd sit at my desk near the window, listening to the rhythm of the neighborhood. Dogs barking, lawnmowers buzzing, kids laughing as they rode their bikes down the street. It was a peaceful life, simple, predictable, until it wasn't. That night, when David came home, he seemed distant. He kissed me on the forehead, not the lips, and asked what was for dinner. His voice sounded tired, and yet his eyes, they weren't tired. They were somewhere else entirely. He picked at his food, barely eating. Then he said, "I might have to travel next week, a short business trip." My fork paused halfway to my mouth. "Oh, where to?" "Just a few client meetings in Atlanta," he said without looking up. Atlanta. It didn't mean much then, but that word would later echo in my head like a haunting refrain. After he went to bed, I sat up in the living room, scrolling through old photos on my phone. Trips, dinners, birthdays. I lingered on one picture from our anniversary 2 years ago. David's arm was around me, his smile wide and easy. Back then, I thought I was lucky. Back then, I thought I knew him. But as I stared at the photo that night, something in his eyes felt unfamiliar, as if I was looking at a stranger I once loved. A few days later, he left for that business trip. He packed light, just one small suitcase, and kissed me goodbye with a strange mixture of guilt and relief. When his car disappeared down the street, I stood by the window for a long time. I don't know why, but I whispered, "Come back to me the same man you left." Maybe I already knew he wouldn't. The week passed slowly. I filled my days with distractions, redecorating the living room, calling my sister, baking bread I didn't even want to eat, anything to silence that gnawing unease. That Thursday, I got a text from him. "Busy day. Call you later. Love you." Short, distant. No emojis, no warmth, just words. Something inside me cracked again. That night, unable to sleep, I opened my laptop. I don't even know what I was looking for. Maybe just reassurance. Maybe the truth. I searched his name on Facebook, scrolling through tagged posts, work photos, anything. But then one picture stopped me cold. It wasn't new. It was a few years old. A woman had posted it, standing beside David, both smiling, his arm around her waist. The caption read, "Family is forever." Her last name? Watson. His last name. I stared at it, my pulse racing. Maybe it was a cousin, maybe a distant relative, but there was something in the way he looked at her. Something too intimate, too familiar. I clicked on her profile. Her page was private, except for one small detail in her bio. Wife, mother, grateful every day. And beside her name, a ring emoji. The room began to spin. I told myself it couldn't be true, that there had to be an explanation. But deep down, I knew. David hadn't just lied to me about Atlanta. He'd lied to me about everything. My hands trembled as I shut the laptop. My chest felt hollow. The silence of the house pressed in around me. I looked at our wedding photo on the mantle, the one I used to dust carefully every Sunday, and for the first time, I saw it differently. The smile on my face was full of faith. The smile on his, now it looked like a secret. The clock ticked loudly in the dark. Every second felt heavier than the last. And that's when the truth began to whisper. The truth I didn't want to hear. I wasn't his first wife. And maybe I wasn't his only one either. The next morning, I moved through the house like a ghost. The motions of routine without the comfort of meaning. I made coffee, I folded laundry, I watered the plants that still leaned toward the sunlight as if nothing in the world had changed. But everything had. Every sound, the hum of the fridge, the ticking of the wall clock, felt louder, sharper. The ordinary had turned hostile, echoing the question pounding inside my head. Who is he, really? I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. When your whole life has been built around someone, admitting a crack feels like announcing an earthquake. Instead, I pretended. I smiled when my sister called, said David was away for work. I even texted him, short messages, careful ones, as if I didn't know what I knew. He replied every few hours. "Good morning, sweetheart. Miss you. Work's crazy, but fine." Each message was like a small cut. Polite, predictable, hollow. There was no warmth behind the words, no inside jokes, no detail, just distance. And that distance was where the truth lived. On Saturday morning, I decided to do something I never thought I'd do. I opened his desk drawer. It wasn't locked, he'd never needed to lock it. I'd never had a reason to look. Until now. Inside, everything was neat. Receipts, spare pens, an old photo of us from our honeymoon. But beneath a pile of papers, I found an envelope with an airline logo. It was for a round-trip ticket. Atlanta. Only
The return flight wasn't to our city. It was to Nashville. And the date? 3 months ago. He'd been there before. My stomach nodded. I sat there for a long time, the paper trembling in my hand. My mind raced, trying to fit pieces together that didn't belong in the same puzzle. Atlanta, Nashville, a woman named Watson, a ring emoji. It all pointed to something I couldn't yet say out loud, because saying it would make it real. I placed the envelope back exactly how I found it. Then I walked outside. The air was cool, the sky gray with the promise of rain. I stood in the garden, the one that David had always said he would finish, and stared at the half-dug patch of earth. He'd promised to plant roses there for me. He never did. The dirt looked raw, unfinished, just like our life. That evening, I went to dinner with my sister, hoping a change of scenery might quiet my thoughts. "Where's David tonight?" she asked casually, cutting into her salad. "Work trip," I said quickly. The lie slid out too easily. She nodded. "That man never stops, does he? You two should take a vacation soon. You look exhausted." I smiled faintly. Maybe when things settle down. But inside, my thoughts were miles away, and a city I'd never been to, with a woman I didn't know, wearing my husband's last name. When I got home that night, I sat in the dark. I didn't turn on the lights, didn't turn on the TV. I just listened. To the refrigerator humming, to the wind outside brushing against the windows, to the sound of my heart breaking in the quiet. And then for the first time, I whispered the words I'd been avoiding. "He's lying to me." It was barely a sound, but once spoken, it couldn't be unsaid. The next morning, I called his office, something I rarely did. "Hi, this is Claire, David's wife. Could you tell me when he'll be back from Atlanta?" There was a pause on the other end. Then a hesitant voice replied, "I'm sorry, ma'am. David hasn't been in Atlanta. He's been on vacation this week." My stomach dropped. "Vacation?" I repeated. "Yes, ma'am. He mentioned visiting family." Family. I hung up without saying another word. The world felt unreal. My hands were shaking. I sat on the kitchen floor because standing suddenly felt impossible. He wasn't just lying about where he was. He was lying about who he was with. And if the woman from the photo, the one with his last name, was who I thought she was, then maybe the word vacation meant something much darker. I didn't cry that day. Instead, I went into his closet. I started scanning his clothes, shirts, jackets, suits. My fingers brushed against fabric until I reached the inside pocket of his navy blazer. There, folded neatly, was a receipt from a jewelry store in Nashville. A gold necklace, purchased 2 months ago. No card, no box. Just proof. My reflection in the mirror caught my eye. Pale, hollow, a woman I barely recognized. I pressed the paper to my chest and whispered, "Who did you buy it for, David?" The silence answered me. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside, the passing cars, the barking dog next door, felt like it was mocking the quiet of my room. I lay awake until dawn when my phone buzzed, a message from him. "Flight delayed, home tomorrow. Can't wait to see you." My thumb hovered over the screen. Then, without thinking, I typed back, "I miss you too." And as soon as I hit send, I hated myself for it. Because I didn't miss him. I missed the man I thought he was. The next day, I did something else I never thought I'd do. I called a friend of mine, Leela, who worked at a travel agency. "Leela," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "can you check something for me? A passenger name, David Watson? I just want to confirm a flight route. There was silence, then the sound of her typing. Claire, are you sure? She asked softly after a few seconds. Yes. More typing. Then quietly, he didn't fly back to your city. He went from Atlanta to Nashville 3 days ago. I closed my eyes. Is he still there? It looks like he booked a return ticket for next Thursday? 4 more days. 4 more days until he'd walk through our door with a kiss and a story. I thanked her and hung up. My mind was numb. But then a thought hit me. Something simple, sharp, and terrifying. If he was there, maybe I could find out who he was there with. I didn't want revenge. I wanted truth. Because once you've lived inside a lie, truth becomes oxygen, even if it burns to breathe it. That night, I packed a small bag. Just a few clothes, my wallet, and the photograph from our wedding. Not because I needed it, but because I wanted to remember the face of the woman who once believed in forever. As I zipped the bag shut, I whispered, "You deserve to know." I left a note on the kitchen table, just one line. Gone to find the truth. Then I turned off the lights, locked the door behind me, and walked into the cold, gray morning. The sun was just beginning to rise, the kind of pale light that makes everything look honest, even the things you wish weren't true. And as I drove toward Nashville, I told myself one thing over and over, like a prayer. Whatever I find, I'll face it.
The highway stretched endlessly ahead of me, long, gray, and silent, like a road leading out of one life and into another. I drove through towns I didn't know, past empty fields and flickering gas station signs. Every mile pulled me farther from the woman I had been, the one who waited by the window for his car to pull into the driveway, the one who believed every word that man said. By the time I reached the outskirts of Nashville, the sun had dipped low, painting the sky in muted shades of pink and gold. I didn't have a plan, just a gnawing need to see him, to see what my life had become without my knowing it. I checked into a small roadside motel, the kind with flickering lights and a vending machine that hummed like an old secret. The woman at the front desk handed me a key attached to a plastic tag. "Traveling alone?" she asked. I hesitated before answering, "Yes, for now." She smiled kindly. "Sometimes that's the best way." I nodded, though my throat felt tight. Alone, the word carried a weight I hadn't yet learned to bear. That night, I lay awake in the narrow bed, listening to the sound of trucks passing in the distance. My heart beat heavy in my chest, restless with dread and anticipation. I opened my laptop and typed David's name again. I scrolled through old posts until I found something new, a tagged photo from just 2 days earlier. There he was, at a family picnic. He was laughing, holding a little boy on his shoulders, a child no older than 3, with dark curls and eyes that looked too much like his. And beside him was the woman from before. The caption read, "So grateful for this beautiful family." I froze. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. He wasn't just visiting. He was living another life. A wife, a son, a home. I shut the laptop slowly, as if closing it could undo what I had seen. It couldn't. Morning came gray and quiet. I sat by the window of the motel room, holding my coffee with both hands, trying to still the tremor in my fingers. I didn't know what to do next. Confront him? Walk away? Pretend I hadn't seen? But pretending was what got me here. So I found the courage to open the Maps app on my phone and search his name. The first result was a business address, one I knew. The second was a residential one I didn't. It was on the edge of town, near a small lake. My pulse quickened.
I copied the address, took a deep breath, and whispered, "Just drive." The neighborhood was quiet, the kind where every lawn looked freshly mowed and mailboxes gleamed white in the morning sun. When I turned the corner, I saw it. A blue house with white shutters and a swing on the porch. David's car was parked in the driveway. My breath caught. I pulled over 2 houses down and just sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. A few minutes later, the front door opened, and there he was. David. He looked the same steady shoulders, the same calm smile I'd fallen for. But there was something else in his expression. Ease. He wasn't pretending here. Behind him, the woman stepped out, carrying a toddler on her hip. David reached for the child, kissing the boy's forehead with a tenderness I hadn't seen from him in years. I felt something inside me collapse, not from anger, but from the realization that the love I'd given so completely had only been half his story. I don't know how long I sat there, watching from the car. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. When he finally drove off alone, I followed, careful, slow, keeping a few cars between us. He turned toward downtown, parked near a cafe, and went inside. I parked across the street. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I told myself this was my moment. To see him, to look him in the eyes and ask why. The cafe was small and quiet, the kind of place we used to go to on lazy Sundays. When I walked in, he was sitting by the window, stirring his coffee absently, phone in hand. For a second, I almost turned around. Part of me still wanted to protect him, or maybe to protect myself from what would come next. But then he looked up, and the color drained from his face. "Claire?" he voiced, was a barely whisper. "Hi, David." I stood there, my voice steady in a way my heart wasn't. He blinked, searching for words. What are you doing here?" I sat down across from him. "I could ask you the same thing." He swallowed hard, his hands trembling. "I can explain." "Then explain," I said quietly. He didn't. Not right away. He just stared down at the table, jaw tightening. Finally, he said, "You weren't supposed to find out this way." "Find out what, David?" My voice broke on his name. That I'm not your only wife? That you built another life and called it love? He winced. "It's not like that." "Then what is it?" He looked up then, eyes glassy with something that wasn't guilt, but exhaustion. "It started before you and I met. I was married years ago. We separated. But things got complicated. Her family, the church, she didn't want a divorce. I thought it would be temporary. And you married me," I whispered slowly. He nodded slowly. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I loved you, Claire. I still do, but..." I cut him off. Don't you dare say love. Love doesn't live in 2 houses. It doesn't wear 2 rings. He closed his eyes. "I tried to fix it, but then she got sick, and when she recovered, she didn't want to start over. And the boy, he's mine. I couldn't just walk away." I stared at him feeling like the air had been sucked out of the room. So what was I, David? A second chance? A secret? A mistake? He didn't answer. His silence was louder than any confession could have been. I stood up. My hands were shaking, but my voice was calm. "You had a choice. You could have told me the truth before you made me build a life with lies." He reached for my hand. "Claire, please." I stepped back. "Don't. You already took enough from me." The other customers were watching now, their murmurs soft and uncertain. I turned and walked out, the sound of the cafe door closing behind me, like the end of a chapter I hadn't known I was still writing. Back in my car, I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes were red, but there was something else there, a steadiness. I whispered to myself, "You saw the truth, and you survived it." And somehow, that felt like the beginning of something new.
The drive back home felt longer than the one that took me there. I thought I'd cry, that I'd pull over somewhere quiet and let it all spill out. But instead I felt empty. The kind of emptiness that doesn't ache, not yet. It just hums quietly under your skin, waiting to be felt. The world outside the car window blurred. Trees, signs, and faces I didn't recognize. I kept thinking about the boy, that little boy with David's eyes. I couldn't bring myself to hate him. He was innocent, just a child born into someone else's deception. No, the hate wasn't for him. It was for the man who stood beside him, smiling as if two lives could fit neatly into one heart. By the time I reached our town, dusk had fallen. The streetlights flickered on one by one, and the air smelled faintly of rain. I parked in the driveway and sat there for a long time, my hands resting on the steering wheel. The house looked the same, warm light in the windows, the faint hum of the fridge inside, but I wasn't the same woman who'd left it 2 days ago. I wasn't his wife anymore. I was a stranger in my own story. Inside, the house felt too still. I walked through the living room, trailing my hand along the back of the couch, past the family photos on the wall, our wedding picture, that trip to Maine, the Christmas morning where he'd surprised me with a dog we never kept. They all looked like memories that belonged to someone else. On the kitchen counter, there was a note in his handwriting. "Had to stay overnight for a meeting. Back Sunday. Love you." The words almost made me laugh, not because they were funny, but because they felt so small now, so meaningless. I tore the note in half and set it aside. That night, I didn't sleep in our bed. I couldn't. I lay on the couch instead, wrapped in a blanket, the glow of the TV playing soft infomercials in the dark. Every so often, I'd catch my reflection in the screen, pale, tired, but awake. More awake than I'd been in years. In the morning, I brewed coffee, then opened my laptop again. I wasn't sure what I was looking for at first. Maybe proof? Maybe a way to make it real. I searched his name again, and this time I went deeper. Business records, property listings, even court filings. And there it was. A marriage certificate, dated 6 years before ours. No divorce decree. It was official. He'd never ended it. He'd lied to me. Not just emotionally, but legally. Something in me snapped then, not in anger, but in clarity. He had built his life on dishonesty, and I'd been carrying the weight of it unknowingly. But not anymore. I took a long breath and whispered to myself, "You can't unsee the truth, Claire, but you can decide what you'll do with it." That afternoon, I called my sister, Ruth. She lived 3 states away, but she'd always been the one who saw through me, even when I tried to sound fine. She answered on the second ring. "Claire? Are you okay? You sound strange." I hesitated. "I found out something about David." A pause. "What kind of something?" "The kind that ends everything." She didn't speak for a moment. I could hear her breathing, soft and steady. Then she said, "Tell me." I told her everything, from the first message to the photo to the confrontation in the cafe. I told her about the boy, about the other woman, about the lies that had stitched my marriage together like a patchwork quilt of betrayal. When I finished, there was silence. Then Ruth said quietly, "Claire, you don't deserve this. You know that, right?" My voice trembled. I don't even know who I am without him. You'll find out. But first, you need to protect yourself, legally, financially, emotionally. Don't let him talk you out of the truth. I nodded, tears spilling down my cheeks. I just wanted a real marriage, Ruth. I know, she said softly, but now you need a real ending. The next day, I called a lawyer. Her name was Melissa. Calm, professional, the kind of woman who spoke in steady sentences that made you feel safe. I told her everything, even the parts that made me feel foolish. She listened without judgment, then said, "You've been deceived, Claire. This isn't your fault. What he did is illegal. It's bigamy." The word hit me like a cold wave. Bigamy. It sounded so formal, so detached. But for me, it was personal. It was my life unraveling in black and white terms. She continued, "We'll handle this quietly for now. I'll file the paperwork, but you need to prepare. Once it's official, it could become public. Are you ready for that?" I hesitated, then nodded. Yes, I think I've been living in the dark long enough. Days turned into a quiet rhythm of waiting. I stopped cooking for 2. I stopped checking my phone for his messages. I started taking walks at dusk when the neighborhood felt peaceful and forgiving. Sometimes I'd see couples on their porches, laughing over shared dinners, and I'd feel a sting of envy. But then I'd remind myself, I used to be them, and I'd rather be alone in truth than together in lies. When David finally came home 3 days later, I was ready. He walked through the door, smiling like nothing had changed. "Hey, you're up early," he said, dropping his bag by the stairs. I didn't answer. I just stood there, arms crossed, my expression calm. He paused. "Claire, what's wrong?" I pointed to the stack of papers on the counter, the printed marriage certificate, the screenshots, and the lawyer's contact information. His face went pale. "I found it," I interrupted. "I found everything." He rubbed his temples, his voice cracking. "Claire, please, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I said quietly. "You married me while you were still married. That's not confusion, David. That's a crime." He stepped closer now, desperate. "I never meant to hurt you. You were the best thing that ever happened to me." I shook my head. "Then you should have treated me like it." He exhaled shakily, sinking into a chair. "What are you going to do?" I met his eyes. "I'm going to stop protecting your lies." That night, he slept in the guest room. Or maybe he didn't sleep at all. I could hear him pacing, opening drawers, sighing. But I didn't go to him. I couldn't. Instead, I stood by the window, watching the moonlight spill across the yard, and whispered to myself, "You did it. You faced it." And for the first time in years, I felt a quiet kind of power, the kind that comes from truth. Sharp, painful, but cleansing. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. The air was heavy, as if the world itself was holding its breath. David was gone. His suitcase was missing, the guest room empty except for a half-folded blanket on the bed. I stood in the doorway, staring at the indent where he'd slept, and felt nothing. No panic, no tears. Just quiet. There was a time I would have chased him, called, begged, reasoned, but that woman was gone now. The one who built her life around his promises had finally stopped believing in ghosts. I went into the kitchen, poured myself a cup of coffee, and sat by the window. The first light of morning painted the street in soft gold. A stray cat wandered across the driveway, graceful and free. Freedom. It still sounded foreign, like a language I hadn't yet learned to speak. By noon, my phone started buzzing. Messages, missed calls, notifications. I ignored them at first, thinking they were the usual. Work emails, Ruth checking in. But then one message caught my eye. It was from an unknown number. "Claire, I think you should see this." There was a link attached.
My hand trembled slightly as I tapped it open. It was a local news article. The headline read, "Prominent contractor accused of double marriage, investigation underway." And there he was, David. His picture stared back at me, the same familiar face I used to wake up beside, now frozen in a mugshot-like stillness. The article detailed the story in sterile language, his marriage to another woman, the overlapping timelines, the legal ramifications. My stomach turned. It was one thing to know the truth privately, it was another to see it laid bare for the world to read. The calls kept coming. Reporters, acquaintances, even old friends who hadn't spoken to me in years. Some sounded shocked, others curious, a few pretending to be concerned while really just wanting gossip. I stopped answering altogether. Instead, I called Ruth. When she picked up, her voice was tight. I saw it, Claire. "Are you okay?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "It's strange. I thought I'd feel humiliated, but I don't. I just feel done." "That's strength, sis," she said softly. "You've already faced the worst of it. Now the rest is just noise." Later that afternoon, I went into town to run errands. At the grocery store, whispers followed me down the aisles, quiet but sharp like paper cuts. "That's her. She didn't know? I heard he had a kid with the other one." I kept my head high, pushing my cart slowly past them. It hurt, of course it did, but every whisper reminded me that I hadn't done anything wrong. For the first time, the shame wasn't mine to carry. When I reached the checkout counter, the young cashier gave me a small, nervous smile. "I'm sorry, ma'am, about everything." I looked up, surprised. "You don't have to be." She hesitated, then said, "My mom went through something like that once. She said the hardest part was realizing she'd lost herself trying to keep someone else happy." I smiled faintly. "Your mom sounds like a wise woman." "She is. She rebuilt her life. You will too." I thanked her and left with my groceries, feeling an unexpected warmth in my chest. Sometimes comfort comes from the most ordinary places, a stranger's kindness, a shared pain. That night, Ruth called again. "You're trending," she said with a half laugh. I sighed. "I didn't want to be famous for this." "Not famous," she corrected. "Visible. People are talking about how strong you've been, how you handled it with dignity. That matters." I wasn't sure if I believed her, but then I opened my messages again, and this time, among the noise, there were new ones, from women I didn't know. One wrote, "Your story gave me courage. I've been living with lies too. Seeing you stand up made me realize I can too." Another said, "You don't know me, but thank you for showing that you can leave without losing yourself." Tears welled up. I hadn't realized until that moment how much I needed to hear that my pain meant something, that it wasn't just destruction but transformation. Days passed and the news cycle churned on. David's name appeared less and less until it vanished completely, replaced by other stories, other scandals. But the echo of it lingered. A few weeks later, I got a call from Melissa, my lawyer. "It's over," she said. "He's agreed to sign everything. The annulment will be finalized soon." I exhaled slowly, the weight on my chest lifting just enough for me to breathe freely again. "Will he face charges?" I asked quietly. "There may be a fine, maybe community service, but legally, you're free now, Claire. Completely. Free. That word again. This time, it didn't feel foreign. It felt like mine. That evening, I drove to the lake on the edge of town. The same lake where we'd used to visit when we first met. The same lake where he'd once promised me forever. The air smelled of wet grass and pine. The sun hung low over the water, scattering gold across its surface. I took off my wedding ring, that thin circle of gold that once meant everything, and held it in my palm. It didn't shine like it used to. I whispered to it, to the ghost of what I'd loved. "You had your time." Then I tossed it gently into the lake. It disappeared with a small splash, ripples spreading outwards until they faded into stillness. And with it, something inside me loosened, the last thread tying me to a lie. On the drive home, I rolled the windows down, letting the wind hit my face. It was cold, sharp, honest. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of being alone. I wasn't waiting for anyone's return, or forgiveness, or explanation. I had survived, and that was enough. When I got home, I lit a candle and sat at the kitchen table, the soft glow flickering against the walls. I opened my journal, the one I hadn't touched in months, and began to write. Not about him, about me. About how healing isn't loud. It's in making dinner for one. It's in cleaning out drawers. It's in learning to love the quiet. And somewhere between the lines, I realized this was not the end of my story. It was only the start of a new chapter I was finally writing for myself.
The weeks that followed were strangely quiet. The house, once filled with the rhythm of two lives brushing past each other, had softened into something simpler. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator again. The ticking of the old wall clock became a companion instead of background noise. In the beginning, the silence scared me. I'd wake in the middle of the night and reach across the bed instinctively, half expecting warmth, half dreading it. But with each passing day, the silence became less empty and more peaceful. It's strange how healing often starts in the smallest ways. For me, it began with a single act, moving the photos. I took down the wedding picture first. The frame was heavy, gold-trimmed, dust gathered in its corners. My reflection stared back at me, frozen beside a man I no longer recognized. I placed it in a box. Then, one by one, I removed the rest. The beach trip, the Christmas dinner, the anniversary smile. When the last one came down, I didn't cry. I just exhaled, deeply, like someone who'd been holding her breath for years. In their place, I hung new ones. Photographs of the ocean, sunsets I'd taken on my own, a painting Ruth had sent me. My walls began to look like mine. Ruth came to visit not long after. She arrived with her usual energy, a tote bag full of snacks, 2 bottles of wine, and a stubborn kind of love that filled every room she entered. When she hugged me at the door, I almost broke. "You look good," she said, stepping back to study me. "Peace suits you." I smiled. "It's a work in progress." We spent the evening talking, cooking, and laughing in that easy way sisters do. No pressure, no pretense. Just presence. At one point, she looked around the house and said, "You've done a lot with the place." "Yeah," I said softly. "I think I'm finally making it mine again." She nodded, a knowing look in her eyes. That's how healing works, you know? Little by little, you take back what was always yours. After she left, I started to notice the beauty in small, ordinary moments again. The smell of coffee at sunrise, the way sunlight spilled across the floorboards, the sound of rain tapping gently against the kitchen window. I started journaling every morning, just 5 minutes, no rules, no expectations. Some days I wrote about the weather, other days I wrote about grief, forgiveness, and what it means to love someone who hurt you. I wrote about the day I found out, the way my heart shattered and yet somehow kept beating. I wrote about the cafe, the quiet confrontation, the moment I realized that walking away wasn't weakness. It was strength, disguised as surrender. And I wrote about that boy, the one I'd never meet, but who would grow up with the truth I'd helped uncover. I prayed he'd learn love differently, with honesty, not secrecy. One afternoon, I went to the farmer's market downtown, a place I hadn't visited in years. I walked past the fruit stalls and flower stands, breathing in the scent of fresh herbs and wild honey. An older woman at one of the booths smiled warmly. She said, "Haven't seen you here before." I said, "It's been a while. I guess I'm starting over." She chuckled softly. "Aren't we all?"
Her words lingered with me the rest of the day. Aren't we all? Starting over wasn't just about endings. It was about learning to trust the rhythm of life again. The way pain softens, how light finds its way through cracks you never meant to make. A month later, Melissa called to confirm everything was finalized. Legally, emotionally, I was free. I thanked her, then sat in silence for a long time after hanging up. Freedom didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like stillness, calm, grounding, real. That night, I cooked a meal for myself. Roasted chicken, garlic potatoes, a small glass of red wine. I lit a candle and set the table for one. It sounds small, but it wasn't. It was an act of reclaiming, of saying, I deserve to be treated kindly, even by myself. Every so often, his memory still visits me. Not like a wound anymore, but like an echo, distant, faded, harmless. Sometimes I wonder if he ever thinks about me, if he ever feels the weight of what he did. I'll never know. But I do know this. I forgave him. Not for his sake, but for mine. Because carrying anger only keeps you tied to the very thing that broke you. Forgiveness, I learned, isn't saying, it's okay. It's saying, it's over. A few months later, Ruth convinced me to take a trip with her, just the two of us. We drove along the coast, stopping at small towns, walking barefoot on the sand, letting the salt air wash everything clean. On the last night, we sat on a pier watching the sunset bleed into the water. She turned to me and said, "You seem lighter." "I am," I said, smiling faintly. "I think I finally understand something." "What's that?" "That sometimes love isn't about holding on. It's about letting go, gently, with grace." She nodded, then slipped her arm through mine. "You always were the brave one." I laughed softly. "I didn't feel brave." "Maybe not then, but you are now." When we got back home, I began volunteering at the local community center, helping women who'd been through difficult relationships rebuild their confidence, their finances, their voices. The first time I sat in that circle of women and told my story out loud, my hands shook. But by the end, I looked around and saw tears, nods, and something like hope. It hit me then, my pain had a purpose. It wasn't just something I survived. It was something I could share. And that made it lighter. Sometimes when I walk through my quiet house now, I think about the woman I used to be, the one who waited by the window, the one who mistook silence for peace. I wish I could tell her that one day she'd wake up and not feel afraid anymore, that she'd learn to smile again without forcing it, that she'd build a life of her own, one that no one could take away from her. But maybe she had to go through it to become me. Healing doesn't come with a single sunrise. It comes in waves, some gentle, some fierce, but each one brings you closer to shore. And when you finally stand on solid ground, you realize it wasn't the storm that defined you. It was how you learned to walk again after it passed. You know, life has a way of teaching us the same lesson over and over again until we finally learn to listen. For the longest time, I thought love meant staying, enduring, holding on no matter how heavy it became. But the truth is, sometimes love is the quiet act of walking away. The kind of courage that whispers, "You deserve peace too." When my world fell apart, I thought it was the end, but it wasn't. It was an awakening, a chance to build something real from the ashes of what I thought I needed. I used to miss him in every small moment, the sound of his footsteps, the echo of his laugh. But over time, I realized I wasn't missing him. I was missing the woman I was when I believed in forever. And that woman, she's still here, just softer, wiser, still capable of love, but no longer willing to lose herself for it. If you've ever had to let go of someone you thought you couldn't live without, I want you to know this. Your story isn't ending. It's unfolding, slowly, beautifully, in ways you can't yet see. Healing doesn't look like moving on overnight. It looks like making coffee the way you like it. It looks like laughing again without guilt. It looks like realizing you don't need closure from someone who never gave you clarity. So tonight, wherever you are, if you're sitting in that same kind of quiet, wondering how to start over, just remember, you already have. Because the moment you choose yourself, the moment you say, I want peace more than I want answers, that's when healing begins. Tell me, if it were you, would you have walked away when the truth came out, or would you have stayed hoping love could survive the lie? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story found you when you needed it most, don't forget to subscribe, because every week I'll be here sharing another story about love, loss, and the kind of quiet strength that helps us all begin again.